This is Gators Breakdown, episode 20, as Florida defeats South Carolina 20-7. Gators Breakdown, you can find us on YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, and TuneIn Radio. So if you wouldn't mind, go please like it, share it, listen to it, watch it on YouTube, however you want to get your Gators Breakdown. You can get it right here on all those channels, like I mentioned, YouTube, iTunes, SoundCloud, and TuneIn Radio. I'm your host, David Waters, again, here on the our post game Gators breakdown. As I mentioned, Muschamp brought his South Carolina Gamecocks into Gainesville, and Jim McElwain and company take care of the Gamecocks 20-7 on Senior Day. Emotional day down there. It was a good time in Gainesville. Went down there with a South Carolina friend of mine, and we had a good time. Got down there early, a little bit of tailgating before a noon kickoff, but the Swamp quickly filled in. About 10 minutes after kickoff, it was pretty much at capacity there. So a little slow arriving crowd, as always, for noon games. But it was good to see the seniors get out there and get recognized for what they've done. Muschamp, their head coach was here, as their opponent. So there was some good emotions. A lot of things were going on around this game. Steve Spurrier, his connection to South Carolina. Mentioned Will Muschamp coming back. So there was a lot of things going on when South Carolina came to town. And plus, let's not forget all the noise in the system before this game. The Florida offense last week, Florida defense. I mean, the whole team. There was a lot of noise in the system after the Arkansas game last week about lack of offense. Of course, the injuries mounted up, quarterback problems with Luke Del Rio, and you got to look at it and say Jim McElwain made the right call going through the week. A lot of people were clamoring for the true freshman, Felipe Franks or Kyle Trask to start, and McElwain midweek named Austin Appleby the starter, and it paid off. Austin Appleby really played good, and I tweeted out last week, a lot of people were still kind of disappointed he was named the starter, but it's not like he played terrible when he was in these games. Went to Tennessee, had a great first half, fell apart in the second half, but I don't think that was too much of his fault. The offense from play calling from Nussmeier, McElwain, that style just went too conservative. So that affected the whole offense, and Appleby was asked to try and, fix an offense that was struggling going 3-and-out at the time just because they couldn't get the run game going in the second half. A lot of quarterbacks are going to struggle when you ask them to do something like that on the road with a Tennessee team that was on fire in the second half. Then he went to Vanderbilt the very next week and struggled, but, a lot of quarterbacks struggle against that Vanderbilt defense. So I know I wasn't so down on Appleby being named a starter. Of course, I thought he should have had a short leash if that was the case, and then maybe the freshman could come in. But Austin Appleby, folks, played admirably. The play calling, Florida scored on their first drive, first time since Tennessee this year, going back to that Tennessee game. So you look at what Austin Appleby can do so far. Look, he gets the team going out of the gate pretty fast. Scored, on their first possession against Tennessee and now against South Carolina. Austin Appleby, 17 of 21. Two of those were drops, and one was an interception, and one was a good pass out of bounds where, he just got rid of the ball. Smart play. So, he should honestly have been 19 of 21. Keontae Lewis drops a wide open pass. Antonio Callaway drops a wide open pass, both of those on third downs. So he's making the right reads. He has his guys open. There was some big drops there, but he had 201 yards passing, almost 10 yards per completion, 2 touchdowns, one nice 18-yarder to Ahmad Fullwood. And I mentioned the one interception to where he hung on the ball too late, threw it over the middle, and ball's picked off. Can't do that. Can't hold on to the ball that long. And expect good things to happen when you throw over the middle late. So, I thought the play calling was great. They used his legs a little bit. He's a lot more mobile than Del Rio. The coaching staff were smart enough to we saw it with Will Greer last year. Will Greer was able to use a little bit of the zone read. And with Florida not using it a lot this year, it was there early. South Carolina didn't necessarily expect it, didn't see it coming. And it really, really paid off for this Gator offense, getting Austin Appleby involved with his legs. So, through the season, I mentioned Austin Appleby and how I've liked kind of how he's played. I wouldn't put the Tennessee loss on his shoulders. Many teams struggle against Vanderbilt, like I mentioned. But for the season, 61 of 93, 65% completion percentage. That's not bad. 671 yards, 5 touchdowns, and 2 interceptions. So, Austin Appleby is playing good enough with this Gator defense to get the job done. He makes this offense click. Since Del Rio's Kentucky game was, definitely the best that he had to show. Austin Appleby, to me, throughout the whole season has played much better than what we saw from Luke Del Rio. So, of course, that begs the question of why maybe he wasn't thrown in last week at Arkansas to, maybe ignite the offense a little bit when Del Rio was struggling, especially after that terrible interception that he threw deep. But all that's water under the bridge. You got to keep moving forward. And I really credit this coaching staff for, getting rid of all the noise in the system. I didn't have a good feeling about this South Carolina game. You're playing at home. It was a noon game. Florida doesn't necessarily usually play good in noon games. We know that. You were playing with a backup quarterback, quote, backup quarterback. He was a backup just in name only to Luke Del Rio. They were about the same quarterback until yesterday. It would just put, in my mind, Austin Appleby was a step above Luke Del Rio. And now, a lot of noise in the system, people calling out the coaches because of the play calling. And I thought it was more execution. And, turned out that I still think that's the case. We saw when there were plays there to be made yesterday. Receivers dropped passes on a couple plays when the play calls were there. They mixed it up with Austin Appleby's legs. It got the run game going. You saw again Antonio Callaway. I mean, finally, we just got him involved in many, many ways. Screen game, quick little out routes to him. Just get the ball in his hands. And I really like what I saw from that. I mean, he had 4 receptions, 48 yards. Yeah, the numbers weren't great. But, they got the ball in his hands. More ways than just trying to throw it deep to him. So what you're doing when you get Callaway involved like that, you're giving him chances to make a big play happen. I mean, maybe he can break one, and there's going to be chances there. We saw in the punt returns against South Carolina where, you give him a little crease, he could probably try and make something happen. That's what they're trying to do. Just get the ball in his hand and maybe something good would happen. He's by far your best playmaker on this team. And now I think you're starting to see, they were struggling a bit at Arkansas. They come back home. And I think they see they have to get Antonio Callaway the ball. We saw the interview midweek last week and Callaway's first interview in a good bit with the media. And you could kind of tell that Florida was probably going to look more ways at getting Antonio Callaway the ball. Still wouldn't mind seeing him on some of those in-around runs. I mean, one he ran for a touchdown against Georgia. But, you keep those few and far between. You got to really catch the defense off guard with those. But keeping up with the passing game right now, I mentioned Austin Appleby, of course, in his numbers, but Ahmad Fullwood, tell you what, 2 catches, 48 yards, and I mentioned that 18-yard interception. And then he had the long, 30-yard where Appleby had to throw it up. Ahmad Fullwood goes up and gets it. And with his big, tall size and frame, that's the kind of play I thought Ahmad Fullwood would make throughout his career at Florida. I thought he'd kind of be your Dallas Baker type, kind of, go up and get the ball type of wide receiver. So he showed it yesterday. Appleby put the trust in him. He went up and got the ball. Nice 30-yard reception. And, he kept a drive going. Appleby had pressure in his face, threw it up. Fullwood comes down with it. Deontay Lewis, he's become, a good safety blanket for these quarterbacks. 4 receptions, 38 yards. He had the other touchdown, the first touchdown of the game. And, DeAndre Goolsby kind of been silent lately. So Deontay Lewis has kind of been the more tight, the more reliable tight end there, and he's really paying off. We saw the Georgia game, his playmaking ability, and again this week against Arkansas. Brandon Powell, 3 receptions for 32 yards. Freddie Swain, Josh Hammond, who's the 2 true freshmen, got involved as well. So, spreading the ball around, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 different players have receptions there. So good on Austin Appleby for spreading the ball around. And the middle of the field was open again. And that's when this Jim McElwain, Doug Nussmeier offense really works at its best is, when the middle of the field is open there. So Sorry, my nose is bothering me a little bit, folks. So if you can hear that, my apologies there. So Florida rushing the ball. Jordan Scarlett really showed out. Showed that he is, the tough nose running back Florida just needs to rely on. Mark Thompson comes in, fumbles in the red zone. And he didn't get another carry for the rest of the game, and good for Jim McElwain doing that and stopping with this rotation. I kind of saw once Thompson fumbled, I didn't think he'd get another carry in the game, and he didn't. So Jordan Scarlett, the bulk of the carries, 20 carries, 134 yards, had a long run of 32 yards. So good on McElwain and Nussmeier for feeding him the ball, because that's what he needs. Austin Appleby, 6 carries, 34 yards. I mentioned the zone reads, had 2 nice runs off of that there. Michael P. Ryan the next with 5 carries, 11 yards. Not much going for P. Ryan there. Cronkite had a 13-yard carry. So the running game got going there. And going back to Mark Thompson and his fumble, and then you had the center exchange fumble. So Florida, this game could have been out of reach by far in the first half. The 2 turnovers I mentioned there, the 2 fumbles that were Mark Thompson's in the red zone, Florida's on, and the center quarterback exchange was within the 5-yard line, and Florida's on its way to score. And, at least that's 2 touchdowns right there, possibly taken off the board. I mean, you could have been looking at close to a, 21 to anywhere from 30-point range lead at halftime. And, Florida should have been up by at least, 21, 24, 30 points going into halftime. They kept shooting themselves in the foot. So, I mentioned, Austin Appleby's stats, 201 yards passing. Not necessarily, he had the 2 drops. And then I just mentioned you had the 171 yards rushing combined. The stats weren't necessarily there, but this team could have put up so many more points early in the game. So the game would have been well out of hand, had Florida not had those 2 turnovers. Something they got to get fixed. Austin Appleby, that's twice now, goal to go situations where a quarterback center exchange fumble and the Gators lose that going into the end zone there. So I think, it can be somewhat pointed at, Florida had to play with their 3rd center going into that. We know what happened last week with all the injuries there. Cameron Dillard, your starting center, went down with an injury last week. So here comes Tyler Jordan to take over for him. Very first offensive play for the Gators, Tyler Jordan goes down. So then here comes redshirt freshman TJ McCoy, played admirably, played great, for all the situations given along the offensive line with the injuries. You had TJ McCoy come in, take over at center. And you had David Sharp, your starting left tackle, go down. So Kavaris Harkless comes in, has to take over for Martez Ivy at guard, while Ivy moves to left tackle to take over for David Sharp. And, you really thought this could have spelled doom for the Florida offense just because of the way they've looked at this season. Not consistent. Had a hard time, pass blocking for Luke Del Rio. Much better with Austin Appleby because he gives a little bit more mobility back there. And then, of course, last week with Arkansas, you only had 12 yards rushing. Couldn't bust a grape there. But tell you what, with the play calling and the misdirection and the quick passing game, it really helped this offensive line. And even these young guys who had to step in and play. So you had, guys playing out of position from what we've known to see them. And then you had new guys just had to come in and play. So TJ McCoy stepping in, besides the quarterback center exchange fumble, which I'll put more on the quarterback. That's quarterback job to get that out. It wasn't that bad of a snap. So, I think the offensive line, you got to give them kudos. And Mike Summers, for all the flack that he gets with this, he had these young guys ready to play. Granted, South Carolina's not the best defense in the SEC. Don't get me wrong by that, but they were playing well. And then you had an offensive line that necessarily was coming off their worst performance of the year at Arkansas, and they bounced back nice. And they bounced back with guys playing out of position and a lot of guys with inexperience coming in, getting playing time and keeping the offense in rhythm. So I think you can look at some of the stats and say, given the circumstances of what Florida was playing with, I know it sounds old. we can slam this offense for many things, but we can't slam them for what they did. And given the circumstances against South Carolina, they came in, they controlled the game, definitely so much in the first half. And you have to just look at the situation there, especially with the way the defense was playing, and a lot of inexperience on that. I'll get to that in a minute too. A lot of inexperience and injuries there too. Given the circumstances, this offense did its job. And like I mentioned, if it wasn't for those 2 fumbles, this game would have been clearly over by halftime, and the score would have looked much prettier than the 20-7 final outcome that it was. So I think you got to move now to the defense and look at how they controlled a very hot South Carolina team coming in, where Jake Bentley come in. They made the switch at quarterback. He was hitting 70% of his throws. Comes in yesterday, 18 of 33, 213 yards. He had some nice passes, even against South Carolina has some young receivers, and of course the Deebo Samuel, their most experienced and explosive receiver. He was making plays. They have receivers get open against Tabor and Wilson. So, the Florida DBs, they're going to give up some passes. Don't get me wrong. It's going to happen. But those guys were getting open a good bit. But Bentley, the 18 of 33, 213 yards, 6.5 yards per completion, and he threw his first interception of the season against his Florida secondary, or Marcel Harris, a guy who we had big high hopes for when he signed with Florida. He's finally starting to come along. He's been playing well, and he gets noticed yesterday for a very nice interception there. So Bentley threw his first interception of the year. His was his first road game of the year. Comes in, and that Florida defensive line, I'll tell you what, they put pressure on him all day long. The South Carolina offensive line, that was the weak point for their offense coming in. That's what they were pointing to as a big scare after watching Florida a couple of weeks ago against Georgia, and what they did against that offensive line and their true freshman quarterback, Jacob Eason. South Carolina was worried about how their offensive line would stack up against this Florida defensive line and Florida defensive front seven. And this Florida defensive front seven played admirably. You had some young guys playing at linebacker, David Reese, Kylan Johnson. You had and Jeremiah Moon was out there at times too. You had 2 true freshmen at times playing at the linebacker position. So so you go and look at the young guys that were playing. I mentioned Reese, and you had Gavanis Davis out there, Kylan Johnson. So Florida had to put some young guys on defense. We saw the injuries, and they keep mounting up. But they keep throwing these young – Jabari Zuniga, of course. You listen to this podcast, one of my favorite players, Vashawn Joseph out there, Antonius Clayton, Ja'Kai Polite, young guys out there in big-time atmosphere. This game was still a game in the fourth quarter, and you having to throw these true freshmen, redshirt freshmen, sophomores out there. And these guys, for what we know this Gator defense is losing going into next year, getting these guys some good playing time in these game-type situations. You have to really commend Jeff Collins, defensive coordinator, and I think Randy Shannon, especially at the linebackers for David Reese, Kylan Johnson, Vashawn Joseph, those guys, those 2 coordinators, Collins and Randy Shannon, give them kudos for getting those guys ready as well. So I think for all around, for the noise in the system going into this week against South Carolina, you got to give the coaching staff Collins, Summers, Nussmeier, and Randy Shannon some big time kudos, because with everything that was going on and they had to throw these young players in, they performed like they were supposed to. They performed like the Florida Gator defense and that we expected to see. And with the young guys on the offensive line and the problems they've had there, to show up like they did, give this coaching staff kudos this week. A lot of noise in the system this past week, and they turned it around and really came in the swamp and played a great game. So David Reese, I mentioned him, 11 total tackles. He could be the next great linebacker for the Gators. I'm not going to put that label on him yet, but you come in as a freshman and you get 11 tackles, and when you don't really have the experience a lot of other guys do, you're making something happen. Quincy Wilson, we know how good of a tackler he is on the outside at corner, 9 tackles, but a lot of guys with some high tackle numbers. Marcel Harris, 7. I mentioned how he's coming along and had an interception, and now 7 tackles yesterday too. Kylan Johnson, 7 tackles. Tease Jalen Tabor, 7. Nick Washington 5, Joey Ivy 5, Sherritt 5, Kavanis Davis 4, Chauncey Gardner 3. So I keep mentioning, you're hearing these young guys. We don't hear the names a lot. David Reese, Kylan Johnson, Kavanis Davis, Chauncey Gardner. These guys are getting playing time, and it's going to pay off next season when all the 7, 8 guys from this defense are no longer going to be here. And these names that I'm mentioning now are the names you're going to be hearing next year a good bit for this Florida defense. But I really have to think you have to like the way they played. When Jake Bentley comes in, like I mentioned, South Carolina's quarterback comes in. He's throwing the ball all over the field, making smart plays for South Carolina, comes in, and Florida puts the clamps down on him. South Carolina rushing, like I mentioned, the Florida defensive line held that in check as well. It was 30 carries for only 43 yards. Longest run was 10 yards for the whole game. Deebo Samuel carry there. So David Williams, 7 attempts for 20 yards for South Carolina. Rico Dowdle, who'd been coming in playing well for South Carolina, he got a little bit banged up. We never saw him come back in. But even before he went out, he was only averaging 2 yards a carry, 9 carries for 18 yards there. In South Carolina receiving, like I mentioned, they had a good mismatch, I think, with Hayden Hurst, their tight end. It's a good mismatch for opposing defenses at tight end. So 3 receptions, 63 yards. He had a touchdown in the end zone, almost caught, but the Florida defense pressured Bentley into where he would have had to make a heck of a catch, and he was trying to bat it back to himself. For that touchdown, but couldn't get it. Deebo Samuel, the number 1 receiver, 4 receptions, 53 yards, had a long of 29 yards. So as I mentioned, these guys were getting open some. It's going to happen. But the Florida defense, after last week, also had to respond after a disappointing showing, and they did. So you had a lot of, I want to go back to, that's pretty much the stats there. I guess I'll go into special teams right quick. And, we saw Antonio Callaway almost keep breaking one. And then we had the phantom holding call, and a lot of fans were up in arms about. It was the Swamp was a boo fest there, and we thought Callaway had broken one, and it was a lot of boos in the stadium when the phantom holding call showed up. But in Callaway, he had 4 punt returns for 100 yards. His longest one was 39. Had plenty of opportunities, and there was a couple chances he could have broken one there. Had seams a good bit, but they closed quickly. But Antonio Callaway showed his 2015 form of returning punts, and almost had one, almost had another one. And Eddie Pinheiro, of course, he comes in. He nailed a 54-yard field goal and I even called it on the play. It was 3rd down. I said there's going to be a little screen play. Florida's going to try and get 5-6 yards closer and line up an Eddie Pinheiro field goal, and that's definitely what happened. It was nice to see. Of course, we get the chance of Eddie in the crowd, and I'll tell you what, he just nailed. There was no doubt about the 54-yard field goal, and it was nice to see him also hit a shorter one as well. That's where he kind of had struggled. He's not struggling with the deep kicks. It's more the, your routine 20, 30-yard field goals, and he hit one of those as well to help this Florida Gator team extend their lead in the second half, where they settled for both field goals there after up 14-0 at halftime. So, all in all, good showing, very emotional. Will Muschamp after the game, kudos to him. Will Muschamp had to go. Don't get me wrong, folks. It had to happen. It wasn't working here, but I was a big Will Muschamp fan. I liked him as a person. I liked him. I liked his style of, carrying his emotion on the sideline. I'd never blamed him once for that. But it just wasn't working at Florida. But you knew the players liked him. And look, people, honestly, what Florida's playing with now, especially on the defensive side of the ball, are his players. So, of course, you can throw shade to him for some of the lack of offense Florida has now. Not all. I still think the current coaching staff gets a lot of the blame there too. But the Florida defense is mostly Will Muschamp's, except now injuries are forcing some of more the younger players to play. But, your superstars on this defense were, the Tabors and the Wilsons and the Jared Davises and Joey Ivy, Sherritt, those big-time senior, junior-laden guys all Will Muschamp's guys. And it was so nice to see after the game. He stood on the field 10, 15 minutes after the game and was, intermingling with his former players. And those former players, there was a line of former players wanting to, to shake Will Muschamp's hand, get a picture with him. And it was good to see. It was senior day. Their former head coaches in the stadium. And it was nice to see them. And Muschamp got a good ovation from on the field, some of the people that knew him from all his time here, some handshaking, some smiles, some picture taking from former staffers, and of course, like I mentioned, former players. So that was good to see. It was nice to see there. I'm sure he would have liked to be in a more winning situation for South Carolina this time, but it was nice to see these seniors get a chance to see their former head coach, a guy that brought them to Florida, and set them up for the run that they're going on now. Played in the East last year, won the East last year, played an SEC championship game, and have a chance to do it again when they travel to LSU next week. So kudos to Will Muschamp, not making a big scene out of that situation. A lot of negativity could have been thrown, and McElwain and Muschamp had a long embrace when they handshook in front of the cameras. And I think McElwain even mentioned his post-game press conference how he was just, kind of thanking Will Muschamp for, for what he's done, for these players that he's brought in, how he molded those players. And McElwain mentioned in his press conference how Muschamp helped him in the transition of when he was hired, of letting him know the deficiencies of the team, what could be fixed, and and things like that. So good on Will Muschamp there. As I mentioned, I liked him as a person. It didn't work out as a head coach, but he brought some talent in, and that's what Florida's reaping the benefits of some of his defensive talent now. It was just talking about seniors there. Felt so bad for Marcus May. He's playing in the senior game, comes out, broken arm. He's going to be out for the rest of the season. And the injuries, like I said, just kept mounting again for the Gators. As Marcus May is getting carted off into the locker room, David Sharp goes down on that very same play. So as you see Sharp walking off and going toward the sideline, you see the cart that Marcus May's on heading to the locker room. It was many injuries happened. So for going into last week after the Georgia game and going into Arkansas, this Florida team was very healthy. You couldn't ask for the health of a team to be as good as it was going into this late in the season. And now the last 2 weeks have just taken its toll, and it's weird that it's you're experiencing your senior guys, Jared Davis, Alex Anzalone, Marcus May, 3 guys who are not going to be here next year on this defense, and now their seasons are cut short. Jared Davis can get back and play some in the late season there, but sad to see for these seniors. Some of them couldn't even play in their last game against us in the Swamp yesterday on Saturday, and now also miss the rest of the season and not being able to play, their final year for the Gators. And folks, they're going to need them. This LSU team coming up, 1 o'clock kickoff, SEC Network for the Gators. Not going to be easy. LSU's playing their best ball of the season at Orgeron's taking over. We saw them give Bama the best game Bama's had all year long, and they absolutely destroyed Arkansas, and a team in Arkansas that destroyed Florida last week. So LSU is going to be bringing it. Leonard Fournette's a little banged up, but he even came back and played after an injury last night. I think he's still dealing with his ankle issue, but Darius Geis had the longest run in LSU history when they played Arkansas. So I think it was 93, 94-yard run from scrimmage. So, of course, LSU's got plenty of options at running back. Danny Etley's playing okay at quarterback. You got that run game going. He's a much better decision maker for what they're doing, and that defense hasn't given up over 21 points a year at all this year. So Florida's going to have their hands full. Young offensive line is going to be going into that game from some guys playing out of position. Don't know the severity of David Sharp's injury, so they get him back at left tackle. So a lot of moving parts again for this Florida offense. So we'll see what they work on this week. Austin Appleby, has another week of practice to get some reps under him. It would have been nice to see if Florida could have put some of those, fumbles that they had in the first half, turned them into points. And if the game would have been a blowout, would have been interesting to see what would have happened at quarterback late in the game. Would McElwain have kept Appleby in, or would he have burned one of the red shirts if the game would have been a blowout to get some experience for Frank or Trask late in the game? That would have been interesting to see if, like I mentioned, if Florida doesn't get many blowouts anymore to play backup quarterbacks. And yesterday was an opportunity to do it, if not for the fumbles. But that happened. It is what it is. I think we have to like what we see. From an overall picture, you take a snapshot of last week, you take a snapshot of yesterday, you compare the two, and it was trending the wrong way for Florida going into this South Carolina game. And as I mentioned, the noise in the system, I didn't feel good about the game. You were playing with a backup quarterback, backup center. You were playing some young guys on the defense after some injuries last week at your linebacker core. You were playing a noon game. Florida doesn't necessarily always play good in noon games. You had your former head coach coming back. Emotions were all over the place. It was senior day. It was just not trending right for Florida. But they came out, give them credit. The noise in the system can chatter down a little bit. They got good quarterback play, and that's what you wanted. And if you ask me, and that's what you ask most Gator fans, you just wanted to see good quarterback play, and that's what we got yesterday with Austin Appleby. So, kudos for the coaching staff figuring out a way to help him be comfortable. Should have only really had 2 incompletions with the one he threw out of bounds and an interception that he had. I mentioned he had 2 drops, but he had 4 incompletions the whole game. Now, so kudos for the coaching staff getting Austin Appleby ready, using his legs, getting that going. Florida gets out of Gainesville, the last home game of the year. Sad to see. It's not the home game schedule wasn't pretty this year. We know that, and they lose it. Have to go to LSU next week to make up for that game. So it was, like I said, emotional day in the swamp. Gators get out with a 20-7 win over their former head coach, Will Muschamp. So. It sets up big time game next week. LSU, Florida wins. They go to Atlanta, and we're representing the East against Alabama. Alabama has already wrapped up the SEC West with Auburn's loss to Georgia, and now Florida can lose to LSU, and Tennessee would have to lose to Vanderbilt and Missouri. Probably won't happen. Kentucky, I think, was their best chance to lose yesterday, and Tennessee had that game in control in the fourth quarter. So Florida needs to win this game. Find a way to win this game. Go to Baton Rouge. Shut the critics up. If Florida's looking for a signature win, it has to be LSU next week. The wins are nice. What they have, only 2 losses on the season, but just not that big signature win you can point to for this Gator team just yet. And hopefully, you got LSU, you got FSU coming up. One of those games, both of those games, can be your season, can be your signature win that you're looking for the season. But, folks, that's all you can ask for. It's in Florida's hands. They're going to a game in Baton Rouge. When you go to Atlanta, lose, and more than likely, you're watching Tennessee win the SEC East. So this is Gators Breakdown. Like I mentioned, you can catch me. I'm right here live on YouTube now, but you can catch the podcast on iTunes, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, all your audio options there. You don't have to worry about the video. You don't have to eat up all your data. Trying to go back and watch this on YouTube. You can go to iTunes, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio to get your audio version. You can like it, listen to it, share it, please, subscribe to it. All those little things there. If you like this Gators Breakdown podcast, thanks for listening. I'm glad the interaction. If you follow me on Twitter at GatorDave_SEC. At GatorDave_SEC. You can follow me there. I sit here. I'll talk football on Twitter all day long if I can, if time allows it. But if you got any questions, you want me to hit anything with these Gators Breakdown podcasts, we will do it. Joey V will join me midweek as we preview Florida's trip to LSU. So this is Gators Breakdown, episode 20 in the books as Florida defeats South Carolina 20-7.